The massive form of Vorith moved through Nexus Station like a walking nightmare. 12 feet of pure muscle and obsidian scales that seemed to absorb the light around him. 4 arms, each one thick enough to crush steel, hung at his sides as he walked. His eyes glowed like hot coals in the darkness, and when he breathed you could hear it, a deep, rumbling sound that made your chest vibrate. Every single species in the galaxy knew what a Creathian warrior meant. It meant death. It meant conquest. It meant entire civilizations wiped out in wars that lasted generations. The history books were filled with stories of Creathian battle fleets reducing planets to ash, of their warriors fighting for days without rest, of strength so terrible that it seemed to defy the laws of physics itself. So when Vorith entered the main corridor of Nexus Station, the reaction was immediate and universal. Merchants who had been haggling over prices suddenly abandoned their stalls, leaving behind goods worth thousands of credits. They didn't care about the money anymore. They cared about being anywhere except near that towering figure of pure terror. Diplomats from the Centauri delegation pressed themselves flat against the walls, their blue skin turning even paler as Vorith passed within 10 feet of them. One of them was shaking so badly that his translator device fell from his trembling hands and clattered on the floor. He didn't bend down to pick it up. He just kept his eyes locked on the Creathian, waiting for the moment when those 4 arms would reach out and end his life. A mother from the Tellian species grabbed her 2 children and pulled them into a storage alcove, covering their eyes so they wouldn't have to see the monster that walked among them. The children whimpered, sensing their mother's fear even if they didn't fully understand why she was so terrified. Station security followed at what they considered a safe distance, about 50 yards back. Their hands hovered over their plasma rifles, though every single one of them knew the truth that nobody wanted to say out loud. If Vorith decided he wanted to start killing people, their weapons wouldn't stop him. They might slow him down for a few seconds, maybe a minute if they got lucky. But a Creathian warrior could tear through reinforced blast doors with those 4 arms. What chance did flesh and blood stand? Vorith had grown used to this over his 200 years of life. Fear was the only language that seemed to translate perfectly across every species, every culture, every world. He'd walked through markets on 50 different planets, and the reaction was always the same. The running. The hiding. The desperate prayers to whatever gods those species believed in. He didn't hate them for it. How could he? His people had earned this reputation through centuries of violence. The fear made sense. It was logical. It was justified. That didn't make it any less lonely, but Vorith had long ago accepted that loneliness was simply part of being Creathian. His assignment was simple enough. Observe the treaty negotiations happening in the diplomatic quarter. Make sure the other species understood that Creathian interests were being watched and protected. Then leave this station and return to the Dominion. Standard diplomatic duty for a warrior of his rank and experience. The only problem was that he had absolutely no idea where the diplomatic quarter actually was in this maze of corridors and levels. Nexus Station was one of the largest hubs in this sector, with thousands of passages that all looked identical to him. The digital signs on the walls flickered with text in dozens of languages, and while his translator implant eventually processed them, there was a delay that left him standing at an intersection feeling genuinely confused. He looked left, then right, then up at the various levels visible through the transparent sections of the station's architecture. Behind him, he heard the now familiar sound of footsteps rapidly moving away. More beings fleeing his presence. That's when he heard the voice. "Hey there, you look lost." Vorith spun around, all 4 of his arms instinctively moving into defensive positions. His combat training took over before his conscious mind could process what was happening. In a real fight, he could have struck with any of those 4 hands in less than a second, delivering blows that would cave in reinforced armor. Then he froze completely because what he saw didn't make any sense. A human stood about 15 feet away from him. Not pressed against a wall. Not running. Not showing any of the signs of absolute terror that Vorith had come to expect. Just standing there in gray maintenance coveralls with tools hanging from a belt, looking up at him with an expression that Vorith couldn't quite interpret. The human was average height for his species, maybe 5.5 feet tall. Brown hair that needed a cut. A weathered face that suggested someone who worked with their hands for a living. The name patch on his coveralls read Tyler Grant in simple block letters. And his eyes, those brown human eyes, looked directly at Vorith without flinching, without fear, with nothing but what appeared to be casual friendliness. Vorith's mind struggled to process this. In 200 years of life, across 50 worlds and hundreds of stations just like this one, no being had ever approached him voluntarily. No one had ever looked at him like he was just another person who happened to need directions. Embassy sector, right? Tyler continued, completely unfazed by the fact that he was talking to something that could literally rip him in half without much effort. He pointed down the left corridor with a casualness that seemed almost absurd given the circumstances. Third level up, can't miss it. Big fancy doors with all the flags and symbols from the different species. You'll recognize it when you see it. Vorth still hadn't moved. He was fairly certain his translator was working correctly, but he ran a quick diagnostic anyway because what he was hearing couldn't possibly be real. Tyler seemed to notice his confusion and smiled. It was a genuine smile, the kind that reached his eyes and suggested actual warmth rather than the nervous grimaces Vorth sometimes saw on beings trying desperately to appear calm when they were actually terrified. Fair warning though, Tyler added, the main lift on that route is broken. Has been for 2 days now, and maintenance keeps pushing back the repair schedule. You'll want to use the cargo elevator around the corner instead. It's the only one rated for your weight. No offense meant by that, just being practical. You are not afraid, Vorth finally managed to say. His voice came out as a deep rumble that made nearby wall panels vibrate slightly. Several beings who had been peeking around distant corners immediately disappeared again at the sound. Tyler shrugged, a very human gesture that Vorth had learned to recognize during his limited dealings with Earth's representatives. Should I be? You're just trying to find the embassy, same as half the folks on this station who get lost trying to find something. This place is a complete maze. I've worked here for 3 years and I still take wrong turns. He stuck out his hand in that peculiar human greeting gesture. Tyler Grant, Environmental Systems Technician. I fix the air you breathe and make sure the water doesn't kill you. Welcome to Nexus Station. Vorth stared at that outstretched hand. It was so small. His own hand, even just one of them, could wrap entirely around the human's forearm. In Creathian culture, touching another warrior was either an act of bonding between clan members or the opening move in a fight to the death. There was no casual middle ground. But this wasn't Creathian culture. This was a human standing in front of him, offering a gesture of greeting like it was the most natural thing in the universe. Slowly, with more care than he'd used for anything in recent memory, Vorth extended his lower right hand. He grasped Tyler's hand as gently as he possibly could, terrified that he might accidentally hurt this strange, fearless human who had appeared in his life like something out of a bizarre dream. I am Vorth of the Creathian Dominion, he said formally. Pleasure to meet you, Vorth. Tyler gave his hand a firm shake, completely unbothered by the fact that he was shaking hands with a being that could crush every bone in his body without breaking a sweat. Now you better get yourself to that embassy before the delegates start panicking. I heard through the station gossip that they've been jumpy all week knowing a Creathian representative was coming. Probably imagining all sorts of dramatic scenarios. Tyler released his hand and gave a casual wave, then turned and headed back toward an open maintenance panel in the wall where tools and diagnostic equipment were scattered around. He started whistling something, some human melody that Vorth didn't recognize, and went right back to work as if he hadn't just done something that would seem completely insane to every other species on the station. Vorth stood there for a long moment watching the human work. Around him, the station slowly came back to life as beings realized the Creathian wasn't currently murdering anyone. The normal sounds of a busy space station gradually resumed. Conversations in multiple languages, the hum of machinery, the footsteps of thousands of beings going about their business. But Vorth barely noticed any of it. His mind was still trying to process what had just happened. The complete absence of fear. The casual friendliness. The genuine helpfulness without any apparent motive beyond simple kindness to a stranger who needed directions. For the first time in decades, Vorth felt something stirring in his chest that he'd almost forgotten existed. It took him a moment to identify the feeling because it had been so long since he'd experienced it. Curiosity. This human, Tyler Grant, had done something no being had managed in 2 centuries. He'd made Vorth genuinely curious about who he was and why he was so different from everyone else in the galaxy. Vorth made his way toward the embassy sector, following Tyler's directions. But his mind wasn't on the upcoming diplomatic meetings anymore. It was on brown eyes that showed no fear, on a smile that seemed genuine, and on a handshake that suggested maybe, just maybe, not everyone in the galaxy saw him as nothing more than a monster. 3 days passed and Vorth couldn't stop thinking about the human. The diplomatic meetings were exactly what he'd expected. Long, tedious sessions where representatives from various species spoke in carefully constructed sentences designed to sound cooperative while actually being veiled threats. Nobody looked directly at him during these sessions. They addressed their comments to the empty space slightly to his left, as if looking at him directly might turn them to stone. It was efficient, he supposed. Fear made negotiations move quickly. Nobody wanted to drag out a meeting when a Creathian warrior was in the room. But it was also hollow. Empty. Every interaction felt like reading from a script that everyone had memorized centuries ago. He found himself wondering what Tyler was doing. Was he fixing another air filtration system? Repairing another broken elevator? And more importantly, would he still be friendly if they met again, or had that first encounter been some kind of strange anomaly? On the third evening, during the station's rest cycle when most beings retreated to their quarters for sleep, Vorith decided to find out. He made his way to the common area, a large cafeteria-style space where beings from across the galaxy could purchase food and eat in a shared environment. It was supposed to promote cross-cultural understanding and cooperation. Mostly it just meant that different species clustered at separate tables, carefully maintaining their own social groups. The room was moderately full when Vorith entered. The effect was instantaneous and dramatic. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. A Diluvian merchant dropped his tray, sending food scattering across the floor. He didn't even look down at it, just backed away slowly with his eyes locked on the Creathian. Within 30 seconds, half the room had emptied completely. Beings grabbed their meals and fled to other sections of the station, preferring to eat in corridors rather than share space with Vorith. Those who remained pushed their tables as far away as possible, creating a massive empty zone around wherever Vorith moved. Then he saw Tyler, sitting alone at a corner table with a meal tray and a data pad, completely absorbed in whatever he was reading. The human looked up at the commotion, and his face immediately brightened with recognition. Vorith, hey, how'd the embassy stuff go? Tyler called out across the now mostly empty room. His voice echoed in the silence. He gestured to the empty seat across from him like it was the most natural thing in the universe. You eaten yet? The food here's not exactly 5-star quality, but it beats the nutrition bars they sell at the vendor machines. Those things taste like cardboard mixed with regret. Every remaining being in the common area stared in absolute horror as Vorith walked toward the human's table. A couple of them actually grabbed their communicators, probably ready to call security or emergency medical services. They were clearly certain they were about to witness a murder. Vorith carefully lowered himself into the reinforced seat across from Tyler. The chair groaned under his weight but held. The table was standard height for most species, which meant it hit Vorith at about mid-chest level. He had to hunch slightly to make the arrangement work. The negotiations proceed as expected, Vorith said carefully, still not entirely sure this wasn't some elaborate setup for something he didn't understand. Your species was not present at the discussions. Nah, Earth doesn't have much stake in the Outer Rim resource disputes, Tyler said, pushing a sealed container across the table toward Vorith. We're still pretty new to this whole galactic community thing. Still figuring out which meetings matter and which ones are just bureaucratic time wasters. He nodded at the container. Try the noodles. They're from a station on the other side of the sector, actually have some flavor. Most of the food here tastes like someone's vague memory of what food should taste like. Vorith picked up the container, marveling at how small it looked in his massive hands. He opened it and found some kind of pasta dish with vegetables and a protein he didn't immediately recognize. He took a cautious bite. It was actually quite good. You continue to show no fear, Vorith said after swallowing. I do not understand why. Every species in the galaxy fears Creathians. It is simply the way things are. Tyler set down his datapad and leaned back in his chair, considering the question seriously. I grew up in Detroit, rough part of the city. This was before Earth really got involved with the galactic community, back when our problems were all local. He took a bite of his own food, chewing thoughtfully. I learned pretty quick that the scariest looking people were usually just regular folks dealing with their own problems. Everyone's got their own stuff going on, you know? Vorith tilted his head slightly, a gesture of curiosity. Explain. There was this guy in my neighborhood, everyone called him Big Mike. Dude was probably 6'5", built like a truck, had this scar across his face from some accident in his youth. Everyone crossed the street when they saw him coming. Parents told their kids to stay away from his house. People treated him like he was dangerous just because of how he looked. Tyler smiled at the memory. Turns out Big Mike spent every weekend volunteering at the animal shelter, bottle-feeding abandoned kittens and walking dogs that nobody else wanted. Gentlest guy you'd ever meet, especially with anything small and helpless. But nobody bothered to find that out because they were too busy being scared. And you believe I am like this, Big Mike? I believe you haven't given me any reason to be scared, Tyler said simply. You needed directions, I gave you directions. You've been on this station for 3 days and haven't hurt anyone. You just walked in here looking for a meal, same as everyone else. He gestured around the now nearly empty common area. All these folks running away, they're reacting to what they think you are, not to anything you've actually done. Vorith absorbed this, turning the concept over in his mind. My people have conquered 17 star systems. We have destroyed fleets. Razed cities. The fear is earned through actions, not appearance. Sure, your people did those things. But did you personally conquer those systems? Tyler met his glowing eyes without flinching. What do you do when you're not at diplomatic meetings, being scary and official? The question caught Vorith completely off guard. In 200 years, across countless diplomatic functions and military briefings, nobody had ever asked him about his personal life. I study ancient combat forms, he said slowly, unsure where this was going. I preserve the traditional weapons techniques of my people. They are being forgotten as we modernize. That sounds important. Cultural preservation and all that. What else? I cultivate crystal gardens on my homeworld. The words came out hesitantly, as if admitting to this hobby might somehow be shameful. Tyler's eyes lit up with genuine interest. Crystal gardens? That sounds beautiful. What kind of crystals are we talking about? Like gemstones or something else? And just like that, Vorith found himself talking. Really talking, not just exchanging formal pleasantries or diplomatic statements. He described the luminescent crystal formations that grew in the deep caves of the Crethean homeworld, how they formed over centuries in the darkness, feeding on mineral-rich water and geothermal energy. He explained how cultivating them was a form of meditation, requiring patience and harmony with their natural growth patterns. You have to understand their rhythm, Vorith said, using all four of his hands to gesture as he spoke. Each crystal formation has its own frequency, its own pattern of growth. If you try to force it or rush it, the crystals become brittle and shatter. But if you work with their nature, nurture them properly, they create these incredible structures that sing when the light hits them correctly. They sing? Tyler leaned forward, fascinated. A resonance. A vibration at specific frequencies. In the deep caves, when you have hundreds of formations all resonating together, it creates harmonies. My people used to meditate in these caves before we became warriors. It was part of our spiritual tradition. Vorith paused, realizing he hadn't talked about this with anyone in decades. Most Cretheans consider it a waste of time now. Too peaceful for a warrior culture. That's their loss, Tyler said firmly. Sounds like you've found something that brings you peace and that's worth protecting. I do something similar, actually, though way less impressive. He pulled up images on his datapad. I restore old combustion vehicles from Earth's pre-space age. Cars and motorcycles mostly. Take these rusted hunks of metal and bring them back to life. It's therapeutic, working with my hands, seeing something broken become whole again. They talked for over an hour. About crystal harmonics and carburetor problems. About the satisfaction of creating something beautiful with your hands even when those hands were built for destruction. About finding peace in a galaxy that seemed designed for conflict. Tyler showed him pictures of a 1967 Mustang he'd been restoring for 3 years, explaining the intricacies of the engine with the same passion Vorith felt when discussing crystal cultivation. Around them, the common area had emptied completely. They were alone in the large space, but neither of them noticed. They were too absorbed in the conversation, in the strange and wonderful discovery that two beings from completely different worlds could find common ground in the most unexpected places. When Vorith finally stood to leave, he felt something he couldn't quite name. It was warm and unfamiliar and slightly uncomfortable, like wearing new armor that hadn't been properly fitted yet. Same time tomorrow? Tyler asked, packing up his datapad. I want to hear more about those crystal harmonics. And maybe I can explain why my Mustang's transmission keeps giving me problems. Fair warning, it might bore you to death. I would enjoy that, Vorith said, and realized he genuinely meant it. I would enjoy that very much. As he walked back to his quarters, past empty corridors where beings had fled at his approach, Vorith understood what that warm, uncomfortable feeling was. For the first time in his long life, he had something he'd never thought possible. He had a friend. Retries. The alarm tore through Nexus Station at 3 in the morning, a screaming wail that dragged everyone from sleep into immediate panic. Red emergency lights flooded the corridors, turning everything into a nightmare landscape of shadows and crimson glow. Automated voices blared in every known language, the translations overlapping into a cacophony of warnings that all said the same terrifying thing. Critical failure in life support grid 7. Evacuation of sectors 12 through 19 now in progress. All personnel report to emergency stations immediately. Vorith was already moving before his mind fully processed what was happening. 2 centuries of military training meant his body responded to crisis on pure instinct. He pulled on his ceremonial armor, the obsidian plates clicking into place across his massive frame, and headed straight for the Crisis Command Center. When he arrived, the scene was controlled chaos. Station personnel rushed back and forth, coordinating evacuation routes and emergency protocols. Commander Wells stood at the center of it all, her face pale and drawn as she stared at a massive holographic display that showed the station's internal systems in terrifying detail. Red warnings pulsed across entire sections of the map. Tyler was already there, which didn't surprise Vorith at all. The human stood next to the commander, still in sleeping clothes with his maintenance jacket thrown over them, studying the display with the intense focus of someone trying to solve an impossible puzzle. "How bad?" Vorith asked, his deep voice cutting through the noise. Commander Wells turned to him, and Vorith could see the desperation in her eyes. "Catastrophic. The main plasma relay in Grid 7 has destabilized. We're not entirely sure how it happened yet, but the containment fields are failing. If that relay goes critical, we lose life support for 10,000 beings. Sectors 12 through 19 will be uninhabitable within an hour. Can the automated systems compensate?" Vorith moved closer to the display, his four hands already analyzing the problem from a tactical perspective. "No. The backup systems are overloaded trying to handle the evacuation protocols. We'd need to manually repair the relay, but that's impossible." Wells pulled up another screen showing the relay chamber itself. "The gravitational fields in that section are malfunctioning. They're fluctuating between 0 gravity and 5 times normal gravity every 30 seconds. Like a switch flipping back and forth. The radiation levels are also climbing into lethal ranges. Our repair drones can't function in those conditions. They get crushed during the high-gravity phases and their circuits fry from the radiation." Tyler spoke up, his finger tracing pathways on the holographic schematic. "I can do the recalibration. I've done this exact type of repair dozens of times on smaller relays throughout the station. It's complicated but not impossible. The problem is getting to the relay and surviving long enough to actually fix it." "Surviving is the key word there," Wells said grimly. "A human body can't take 5 times normal gravity. Your bones would shatter. Your organs would be crushed. Even if you made it through 1 or 2 cycles, you'd be dead before you reached the relay chamber." "I can survive it," Vorith said. Every head in the command center turned toward him. Creathian physiology evolved on a high-gravity world. "Our bones are nearly unbreakable, our muscles designed specifically for extreme gravitational stress. 5 times normal gravity would be uncomfortable and exhausting, but not fatal. Not immediately. The radiation levels," Wells started to object. "Will kill me," Vorith finished calmly. "But slowly, not instantly. Creathian cellular structure is more resistant to radiation than most species. I would estimate I have approximately 45 minutes of exposure before the damage becomes irreversible. More than enough time for this repair." Tyler was already grabbing his toolkit from where he'd apparently dropped it when he first arrived. "Then we go together. You get me to the relay, I'll talk you through the repair process step by step. You'll be my hands, I'll be your technical knowledge." "This is insane," Wells said, but her voice lacked conviction. She was looking at the evacuation statistics on another screen. "We've gotten 6,000 people out so far. That leaves 4,000 who won't make it before life support fails completely. We're running out of time." "Then we don't waste any more of it arguing," Tyler said firmly. They suited up in the emergency equipment bay nearest to the damaged section. Tyler's suit was standard issue for hazardous repairs, designed to provide some protection against radiation and extreme conditions. It wouldn't be enough, but it was better than nothing. Vorith's suit had to be cobbled together from industrial cargo handling equipment, the only gear on the station designed for something his size. It barely fit across his massive frame and looked like it might fall apart at any moment. They loaded up portable shielding units, emergency medical supplies, and every tool Tyler thought they might need. The whole time, station personnel watched them with expressions that mixed hope and horror. Everyone knew what this mission really meant. They were watching 2 people volunteer to die so that thousands of others might live. The access corridor to the damaged section felt like walking into the mouth of hell itself. The temperature climbed with every step they took deeper into the station's infrastructure. Warning signs flashed on every wall, automated voices urging them to turn back, explaining in calm tones that they were entering a zone marked for certain death. The relay chamber was worse than anything Vorith had imagined. It was a massive spherical room, maybe 50 meters across, filled with conduits and power systems that pulsed with barely contained energy. The gravitational fluctuations hit them the moment they entered, and hit them hard. 1 second Vorith was standing normally, his weight distributed across his 4 limbs. The next second, gravity vanished completely and they were floating, tumbling through the air with nothing to hold onto. Tyler, strapped securely to a harness on Vorith's back, let out a startled yelp as they spun. Vorith spread his 4 arms, trying to orient himself, reaching for anything solid. His fingers found a support beam and he grabbed it just as gravity slammed back with crushing force. The sudden weight felt like a mountain had been dropped on his shoulders. His muscles screamed in protest, his bones creaked under the stress, but they held. Everything held. Tyler's voice came through the comm system, strained but focused. Left side, the red conduit, about 20 meters from our position. That's where the plasma leak started. We need to seal it first before we can even think about the main relay. They pushed forward through the chaos. Zero gravity would hit and they'd float, Vorith using his strength to propel them across the chamber by grabbing beams and pushing off. Then gravity would return and they'd fall, Vorith twisting his body mid-drop to take the impact on his armored back, protecting the fragile human clinging to him. Thanks, Tyler gasped after one particularly brutal landing. That would have turned me into paste. Save your gratitude until we survive this, Vorith grunted, already moving again. The plasma leak was spraying superheated energy across a section of the chamber, adding another deadly hazard to an already impossible situation. Tyler talked Vorith through the sealing process, explaining which tools to use and where to apply them. Vorith's massive hands moved with delicate precision, following instructions that came in a steady stream from the human on his back. Rotate that seal 90 degrees clockwise. No, you're clockwise, not mine, we're facing different directions. They're perfect. Now apply the molecular bonding agent before the next gravity shift. They worked like that for what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes. Tyler's voice stayed calm and clear, breaking down complex technical procedures into simple steps that Vorith could execute. And Vorith's body endured punishment that would have killed any other species, his Crethian physiology pushed to its absolute limits but refusing to break. The main relay recalibration required them to access a control panel positioned at the worst possible spot in the chamber, suspended in midair with no nearby handholds. They had to time their approach perfectly, using a moment of zero gravity to float across, then working frantically during the brief windows when gravity returned and they could brace themselves against the panel. Input sequence 773 Alpha 9, Tyler called out, his voice getting weaker now. The radiation was affecting him badly despite the suit's protection. Then wait for the confirmation tone before moving to the next sequence. Vorith's fingers flew across the control panel, each input requiring intense concentration because his hands were so large compared to the controls designed for smaller species. One wrong move, one fat-fingered mistake, and they'd have to start over. Or worse, they'd trigger a complete cascade failure. Around them, energy arced and crackled, the dying relay system screaming its failure in displays of light and force that would have been beautiful if they weren't so deadly. Vorith felt his scales beginning to blister from the radiation exposure. His movements were getting slower, his muscles struggling to respond as the cellular damage accumulated. Final sequence, Tyler said, and Vorith could hear him struggling to stay conscious. Input 992 Delta 4, then hit the manual override. Vorith's hands shook as he entered the last sequence. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. The relay continued its death spiral, the gravitational fluctuations becoming even more violent. Then all at once, everything stabilized. The gravity normalized to standard. The radiation levels began dropping as containment fields reasserted themselves. The relay hummed with restored functionality instead of screaming with impending failure. We did it, Tyler whispered. Vorith, we actually did it. Getting back to the access corridor took the last of Vorith's strength. His legs barely functioned, his 4 arms hanging limp at his sides. Tyler had passed out at some point, his breathing shallow but steady. Medical teams swarmed them the moment they staggered through the access door, emergency radiation treatment being administered before they'd even fully exited the hazard zone. Through the haze of exhaustion and pain, Vorith could see the command center screens showing the life support systems returning to full function. 4,000 beings who had been facing certain death were now safe. The evacuation had been stopped. The crisis was over. Commander Wells appeared in his blurry field of vision, her face wet with tears. You saved them. Both of you saved 10,000 souls. How can we ever? No thanks needed, Vorith managed to say, his voice barely a whisper. Just please less fear next time. Maybe more understanding. As consciousness began to fade, the last thing Vorith saw was the crowd gathering outside the medical bay. Beings from dozens of species, no longer running in fear but standing in respect, waiting to see if the Creathian warrior and the human maintenance tech who had risked everything for strangers would survive their heroism. Retries. The medical bay kept Vorith and Tyler for 3 full days of intensive treatment. The radiation exposure had done serious damage to both of them, though Tyler had gotten the worst of it despite Vorith's attempts to shield him. The human spent the first day unconscious while doctors worked frantically to repair the cellular damage, pumping him full of medications and treatments that Vorith couldn't begin to understand. Vorith's own recovery was faster, his Creathian biology proving its resilience once again. By the second day he was conscious and mobile, though his scales had taken on a grayish tint from the radiation burns and his movements were slow and painful. The doctors told him he'd make a full recovery given time. They told him he was incredibly lucky. They didn't need to tell him how close he'd come to dying, because he'd felt every moment of it in that relay chamber. What surprised him most wasn't the medical care or the pain or even the exhaustion that sat in his bones like lead weight. It was what was happening outside the medical bay. The station had changed. On the second day, when Vorith was strong enough to walk to the observation window, he saw something he'd never witnessed in 200 years of life. Beings from different species had gathered in the corridor outside, and they weren't running away. They were waiting. Some held signs with messages of gratitude written in various languages. Others had brought offerings, flowers from their homeworlds, tokens of respect from their cultures, gifts that represented hope and appreciation. A Tuluvian child, no more than 5 years old in their species aging, had drawn a picture with crayons. It showed a big black figure and a small brown figure holding hands under a shining sun. The child's parent held them up to the window so Vorith could see it clearly, and the kid waved enthusiastically, completely unafraid. Vorith felt something crack inside his chest, some hard shell he'd been carrying for centuries finally breaking open. When Tyler woke up on the third day, Vorith was sitting beside his bed. The human's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then slowly finding Vorith's glowing gaze. "We made it." Tyler's voice was hoarse and weak. "We made it," Vorith confirmed. "And you're going to be fine. The doctors say full recovery within 2 weeks." Tyler managed a tired smile. 2 weeks off work? Medical leave? Don't tell my supervisor, but that sounds pretty good right now. He shifted slightly in the bed, wincing at the movement. Did everyone get out? The evacuation sectors. Everyone survived. 10,000 beings are alive because of what we did. What you did, Tyler corrected. I just gave instructions. You're the one who carried us through literal hell. I could not have done it without your knowledge. We succeeded together. Vorith leaned forward slightly. The station has changed, Tyler. The people outside, they are no longer afraid. They are grateful. Some are even curious. Curious is good, Tyler said. Curious means they're willing to learn. That's all we can ask for, really. The coalition representatives came to visit on the afternoon of the third day. They arrived as a group, 12 species represented by their diplomatic leaders, and they looked deeply uncomfortable. The Valasian spokesperson who had argued so passionately for Creathian expulsion now stood at the front of the group, her translucent skin showing the rapid pulse of her internal organs, a sign of nervousness in her species. Vorith of the Creathian Dominion, she began formally, we have come to offer our apologies and to withdraw our petition for your expulsion. Our judgment was clouded by fear and historical prejudice. You have demonstrated through your actions that character is measured not by capacity for violence, but by choice and courage. Vorith listened quietly as each representative spoke, offering their own apologies and gratitude. Some were more sincere than others, he could tell, but the fact that they came at all meant something. It meant the possibility of change, however slow and difficult that change might be. When they finished, Vorith stood carefully from his chair, his full height making several of the delegates step back reflexively before catching themselves. I accept your apologies, he said simply. And I hope that in the future you will judge not just Creathians but all beings by their actions rather than their appearance or history. Fear is natural. But letting fear rule you is a choice. Commander Wells came by that evening with official commendations for both of them. Station medals, formal recognition of heroism, all the bureaucratic acknowledgement that came with doing something extraordinary. She also brought news. The story has spread beyond Nexus Station, Wells explained, pulling up news feeds on her datapad. Reports about what happened here are being broadcast across the galactic network. A Creathian warrior and a human maintenance tech saving thousands together. People are paying attention. Vorith watched the news coverage with growing amazement. Journalists from a dozen worlds were covering the story, interviewing beings who had been in the evacuation zones, showing footage of the moment when Vorith and Tyler had emerged from the relay chamber barely alive. The narrative was spreading, changing, evolving into something bigger than just one station's crisis. On the morning of the fourth day, Vorith received a message from the Crethean Dominion. His military command wanted a full report on what had occurred. More interestingly, they wanted to know more about humanity and this concept of friendship that had led to such unprecedented cooperation. Tyler helped him pack his belongings when the doctors finally cleared him for departure. The human was still weak, moving slowly and carefully, but he'd insisted on being there. They packed in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of silence that only exists between people who've been through something intense together. "Your ship leaves in 2 hours," Tyler said, sealing a container that held Vorith's personal effects. "Back to Crethean space for debriefing and probably a lot of questions about why you nearly died for a station full of strangers." "They will not understand," Vorith admitted. "My people do not have much experience with friendships outside our clans. We understand loyalty to family, honor to our code, duty to the Dominion. But friendship freely given to someone from another species." He shook his head. "This is new territory for us." "Maybe that's a good thing," Tyler said. "New territory means room to grow, room to become something better than what you were before." They made their way to the docking bay, moving slowly through corridors that were now filled with normal activity. Beings no longer fled at Vorith's approach. Some nodded respectfully. Others smiled. A few even greeted him by name, which was utterly surreal. The docking bay itself was crowded. Word had spread that Vorith was departing, and apparently half the station wanted to see him off. Ambassador Karath stood with the other Crethean delegates, their postures radiating something that might have been pride or perhaps confusion at the positive attention their warrior was receiving. Commander Wells presented Vorith with the station's highest civilian honor, a crystalline medal that caught the light and threw rainbow patterns across the assembled crowd. The coalition representatives stood in a line, each offering formal thanks one more time. Children from various species watched with wide, curious eyes, no longer seeing a monster but a hero. Through it all, Tyler stood beside him, the human's presence a steady anchor in the overwhelming sea of attention. When it was finally time to board, Vorith and Tyler stood together at the airlock entrance. The massive warrior and the small human, an unlikely pair who had somehow changed the political and social landscape of an entire station through simple friendship and shared courage. "Stay in touch," Tyler said, offering his hand for that peculiar human handshake. "Send me updates on those crystal gardens. And if you're ever back in this sector, you know where to find me. Probably elbow deep in some malfunctioning air filter, but I'll make time." Vorith took Tyler's hand with infinite gentleness, marveling as he had that first day at how small and fragile it felt in his massive palm. "I will return," he promised. "And Tyler, thank you. For seeing me when everyone else only saw a monster. For standing beside me when it would have been safer to run. For showing me what true courage looks like." "Hey, you're the one who walked into a radiation-filled death trap to save strangers," Tyler pointed out. "No," Vorith said firmly. "You did the brave thing first. You offered friendship when the entire galaxy offered only fear. That required a courage I am only beginning to understand. That is the bravery that changes worlds." They stood there for a moment longer, the comfortable silence of genuine friendship needing no words. Then Vorith boarded his ship, and Tyler watched from the observation deck as the Crethean vessel powered up and began its departure sequence. But the story didn't end with that departure. In fact, in many ways it was only beginning. Word of what happened at Nexus Station spread through the galactic community like ripples from a stone thrown into still water. News networks covered it. Diplomatic channels discussed it. Social groups debated it. And slowly, gradually, something fundamental began to shift in how species viewed each other. Other Cretheans, inspired by Vorith's experience and emboldened by the positive response, began requesting assignments on mixed-species stations and diplomatic posts. They arrived expecting fear and hostility, and while they certainly still encountered it, they also found something else. They found humans willing to look past intimidating exteriors and massive frames to see the individuals beneath. Humans, it turned out, had a peculiar gift. Maybe it came from their own violent history, from having fought and killed each other for thousands of years before finally learning to cooperate. Maybe it came from growing up on a world with such diverse cultures and appearances that they'd learned to judge people by character rather than looks. Or maybe it was just something inherent to humanity, some stubborn optimism that insisted on seeing the best in people even when the worst was staring them in the face. Whatever the reason, humans became known across the galaxy as the species brave enough to build bridges when everyone else was busy building walls. They earned a reputation not as the strongest fighters or the most advanced technologists, but as the people who could make friends with anyone willing to be friendly back. 6 months after leaving Nexus Station, Vorith received his next assignment. He was being sent to a new diplomatic outpost, one that specialized in conflict resolution between species with difficult histories. The assignment came with a request: if possible, work with human personnel who understood the value of looking past appearances. 6 months after that, Tyler received a package delivered through the official diplomatic courier system. Inside was a crystal formation from Vorith's personal garden, carefully preserved and mounted in a protective case. The crystals glowed with soft blue light, and when Tyler held them up in his quarters, they hummed with that harmonic resonance Vorith had described. The attached message was simple: for the friend who taught me to grow more than crystals. May this remind you that small acts of courage create ripples across the galaxy. With honor and eternal gratitude. Vorith. Tyler placed the crystal on his desk in the maintenance office where everyone passing by could see it. And when people asked about it, he would tell the story. About a Creathian warrior who needed directions. About overcoming fear with friendship. About saving thousands of lives together. About how sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply see someone as a person instead of a collection of prejudices and assumptions. On stations throughout known space, humans and Creathians began working together. At first it was awkward, both sides uncertain how to navigate this new dynamic. But gradually, naturally, friendships formed. Creathians discovered that humans could be funny, irreverent, deeply loyal, and surprisingly fearless. Humans discovered that Creathians could be thoughtful, artistic, gentle with those smaller than themselves, and hungry for connections they'd been denied by centuries of isolation through fear. Other species watched this partnership develop and began questioning their own prejudices. If humans could befriend Creathians, the galaxy's most feared warriors, then perhaps other unlikely friendships were possible. Perhaps the walls built by fear and history could be dismantled, one relationship at a time. The story of Vorith and Tyler became something of a legend, passed around diplomatic circles and told to children across multiple worlds. The details got embellished over time, as stories do. Some versions had them fighting off pirates. Others had them preventing a station-wide explosion through nothing but courage and determination. But the core remained constant. One human had the bravery to befriend a giant alien warrior, and that simple act of courage had changed the galaxy. Years later, when historians looked back at this period, they would point to Nexus Station as a turning point. The moment when the galaxy began moving away from fear-based interactions toward something more hopeful. They would cite political changes, treaty modifications, new cultural exchange programs. But they would also tell the story of Tyler Grant, a maintenance technician who fixed air filters and didn't see monsters when he looked at people. And Vorith of the Creathian Dominion, a warrior who learned that the strongest bonds aren't forged through conquest but through friendship freely given. Because in the end, that's what humanity brought to the stars. Not superior technology or military might or even particularly advanced philosophy. They brought the radical courage to see people as individuals worthy of friendship rather than threats to be feared. They brought the stubborn insistence that connection was possible even when everything in history said it wasn't. And the galaxy, touched by that courage and transformed by those friendships, became something better than it had been before. All because one human looked at a towering alien warrior and instead of running away, simply smiled and said, "Hey there, you look lost." Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.